morning early. And Winnie, who's not here right now, but they put their time into, meeting with us on a regular basis, making sure how things are going, making sure when to say, hey, listen, how, when you got some updates, we really like to see so they take time out of their day, and on a regular basis to meet with us and keep engaged, keep things going. So my appreciation to your work. We got a couple of topics that we wanted to come up, but there's a couple of things that we really wanted to talk about with you all. And then there's also, that we're here for you. So there's questions, whether it was talked about in another meeting or whatever, it doesn't matter. If you have anything you want to talk about, anything we could do or address, that's what we're here for. But we have a couple of things that we would like to address with you all. Number one, just a little project overview. I know you've all some of you for quite some time have been living this project. So I just want to give just a little bit of an overview of about the project, just to put it all in context. Well, then we wanted to talk about a little bit about some of the permitting activities, and that's what they will talk to. And this is where, because I think the biggest question that we get from the task force is, well, when are we going to be able to comment on something? When is it going to be something that we can review and we can actually understand it better? So we're going to talk a little bit about that, about what those opportunities will be, and Dave will talk to that. The next that we have is the navigational safety plan. So there is a requirement, state and federal, for the project as far as how it is marked, what the paint looks like, how the markings on it look like, what the illumination, has to be on it, and as well, audible, a full platform requirement. But we did want to talk about that and give you the opportunity to give us some feedback before we take it to the next step as well. So we take that into consideration. And Dan will be talking specifically to that. And then, like I said before, we're here, the last vote left, right? So there's nowhere else for us to be. And if there's any other questions or anything we could do or try to help with, we'll do the best we can. If we don't have the answers, we'll make sure that we get back through the task force and through the postings to make sure. Okay. One of the big questions I get, because it can be a little confusing sometimes, is who is New England Aquaventus? What is it Diamond Offshore Wind? They hear about this other company called RWE, and then everyone remembers, well, you know what? This was the University of Maine, though, right? So isn't this the University of Maine? So who was the project? So I just wanted to help along with that, to put it in context, is that the developer is New England Aquaventus. So that's the group, those are the entities that are going to develop it and to construct it and to operate it. And that is a 50-50 partnership between two companies. Diamond Offshore Wind, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Mitsubishi, which I am an employee of and I work for, and RWE, which is another world leader in energy based out of Germany, with multiple holdings, extensive holdings in the U.S., as well in the renewable sector, in onshore wind, solar, and energy storage. Now, what happened to University of Maine? Because this was initially a University of Maine project that brought it together, and actually started a lot of the development activities. Well, the University of Maine is still very, very much involved, and we work with the university on a regular, sometimes daily basis. How we're engineering put this project through, but their piece of this is, number one, is that hull design, the foundation, what's going to be floating out there. So I think you've all heard that this is their patented, technology, and it's one thing to create this technology and to be able to say, okay, this is how it's going to work. But now we're here, and it's all these team members are here to decide, well, then how do you actually build it, and then how do you actually then put it out there, and how do you operate on it? So there's a lot of things that we work with the university, still, like I said, very closely. But they are in this situation, in this design, they are contributing into the project. Okay, so that's kind of important. I just wanted to put that in context as how that works out. How are we doing?
Rob, can we do the buttons on that? Just down arrow?
Yeah. I left my clapper mode. In there. So just a couple, I didn't want to spend a lot of time in here because I think a lot of you have been, been hearing this for some time. But it is a single turbine. That'll be approximately 11 megawatts turbine. Now, some of you may recall initially, when this started, the thought that it might be 2, right? And there were much smaller turbines at the time. But what's happened is that time has happened and technology has evolved, to the extent that getting those smaller turbines is just not feasible anymore in the market. The market and the technology has evolved that scale. If you can get more megawatt hours out of a turbine, it just becomes more economical. And so technology has evolved while this project has continued to evolve as well. And that's why I was looking at that one single turbine. I think, and you have to excuse me if I pause, it's just that talking in this sometimes gives me a little. And the water depth, I think, as you all know, one of the key aspects, one of the things that was very attractive about being 2 miles off of the island is the water depth. Because what we're doing here is testing. This is the demonstration project to demonstrate how that foundation is going to work, right? How it's going to be built and how it's going to work. That is what this one single turbine is all about, to demonstrate that. That is a key piece to the pie. So the depths up here were really important. So having over 300 feet of deep water, about 2 miles off south of the island is exactly that type of depth that we want to be at to test that technology, to demonstrate how it's going to work. So oh, please.
Is this a new technology? I know various, like the Dutch and the Danish have offshore wind turbines. Is this a different design? You say the University of Maine is developing something new ideas?
Sure, yeah. So the offshore winds to the Danes in Europe and the UK, 18, 20 plus years, this has been happening technology, but it's been largely what they define as a monopile, right? Which is taking your straw that you're going to fit for your turbine on and driving it into the ground until you hit bedrock, and stop it. All right, and you can do that in shallow waters. And there's still a lot of the leases that are going out today, the federal government, are meant to be that exact type of design. Okay. But what is new about this is that floating foundation. So there are, I believe, three, maybe four, at least 3, single turbines where other technologies to float in deeper waters, are being assessed, in other countries. All right. So, but this is the technology that is going to be put to be demonstrated here with the state is University of Maine technology. And a big part, I think a very important part of that storyline of what the state's looking for is homegrown technology, in home state waters, creating home jobs. And I believe that is kind of that's a big part of the legislation that enacted this opportunity. Okay. So as I spoke for, I think we're talking approximately 2.5 miles off the south side. I have to make myself. Okay. All right. Of the island, which puts us, approximately 14 miles from the main coast. We had a little discussion aside before at a sidebar, but I think it's important to restate is that part of the legislation that created this opportunity in the state waters, which are up to 2 miles off the shore, 3 miles off the shore, they're just saying they're listening, is the potential, is the fact that this would be the only project that would be allowed to be moratorium, on offshore wind in the state waters after this was approved. So they're looking forward, either the moratorium gets lifted, or it'll be in federal waters, that'll be outside of the state waters. I think that was a good point that was brought up by the couple, that was here earlier.
Can you repeat that? I'm not following you.
Sure. So up to from the shore to 3 miles out is state waters, right? It's the state of Maine, right? So when you go beyond that, you're in federal waters. All right, which would be driven by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, all right, managed by that
So we are 3 miles out from Monhegan, which is still part of the state.
Hi, I'm Genevieve McDonald, and I also used to be a member of the Maine House of Representatives, so, and I'm a commercial fisherman from Stonington, so. The state waters of the state of Maine are 3 miles from the nearest point of land. So 3 miles from Monhegan, so there's 2 pieces of legislation that define the demonstration project. One is the demonstration project itself is limited to a single turbine. So I think it was actually by megawatt, which has now
22.
become a single turbine. So there can be additional turbines in this area, in this demonstration site. The second piece of legislation that we passed, this was my colleague in the Maine legislature.
I just happened to be on vacation in Monhegan.
She also serves on Energy Utilities Committee, was a moratorium on state waters development with the exclusion of this project. So there won't be any more development of offshore wind by any developer anywhere within state waters of the state of Maine.
But you're saying there could be more than this one demonstration out here
No,
to
I
go to
thought that's
22
what you just
megawatts?
said.
no, so it started as 2, oh, sorry, it went by megawatts. There was a cap on how many megawatts it could be. It started as 2, technology now allows for that to be 1.
And it is being developed as a single turbine.
Okay.
You know, so anything that we would request to get bigger, but that would require. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Genevieve. You know, I think it's important that, it wasn't until 2019 that actually legislation was passed to put this, allow this to happen. And that's kind of when, NEAV, the partnership between RWE and Diamond Offshore Wind happened. That's when we came in, to take over for the University of Maine, to develop, construct and operate the project. We do have a local presence in Portland, and I enjoy it very much when I get a chance to go there. It was a great place to visit, and we do have a local presence in Portland. The connection, so the power of this, the electricity generated from this, will be making its way to shore, and it will be powering houses. And that is scheduled right now to come into the Booth Bay area for make landfall, in which it'll be, they connect into the central main power grid from there.
Rob, I think it's also important to point in terms of the limiting factor on this area. We've mentioned the legislative and the legal limiting factor. The other limiting factor is this cable is being sized for the output of a single turbine. It is not a big cable that you could put more power onto, either on the site or other sites, right? This cable
Yeah.
is essentially, if you think about it as an extension cord, it's an extension cord that'll work for a small lamp, not to light an entire house, right? So
Yeah,
that's an important limiting factor.
yeah, no, that's a good point, Dave,
And does any of that energy come to the island?
No, because the energy, as I understand it from the island, is brought by diesel, it's a diesel generator run, and there is not. There's not.
Correct. No, when the project was first discussed, there was it was either the island was gonna get power from the project or a financial settlement. So we decided for the financial settlement that is currently funding our broadband initiative.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I think a big, it comes back that it's the University of Maine, it's just not about the foundation, the hull in that technology, but an awful lot of support and work, working through about the research, on the impact on the fisheries, research development, the amount of work that's going to go into this. A lot of it's sponsored by the federal government as well, to understand how these projects interact, with the environment, is a critical part of how moving forward as well. Question?
Can you tell me the dimensions of this one generator?
Funny you should ask.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, all right. So if you think about it, roughly from the water to the nacelle, if you will, which is the height, it's approximately 400 feet. Okay, and then if we talk about it to the tip height, is a little over 730 feet. Construction. Yeah. And then foundation, if you think about the foundation is Dan, you want to talk to the foundation wall?
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so the foundation itself is all concrete structure. Right, so this over here is shown, this is all concrete. And it has bottom beams, which are, the lower section of the foundation, column sections, and then a top beam. The top beam is steel. So those bottom beams are approximately 40 feet wide or 26 feet tall. And these outer columns are about 41 feet in diameter. So it's a very substantial structure, the foundation, and it sits about 66 feet below the water line here. So that's how much the structure draws. And then on top of that, with the WTG, which is the power section. Below water, it also has an anchor system that holds it to the seabed.
Sorry, Rob, I think it may also be worth pointing out, there's an economic story. When the university researchers and professors thought about how to design this and what materials to make it out of, they had various options, right? Steel and concrete, and they decided if we do it out of concrete, Maine can build it. If we do it out of some other materials, the only way that could be fabricated at this size is a long way away from here. So that's why they pursued concrete. And it also builds upon the expertise that exists in the Maine construction community. If we think about the bridges that have been built, over the last 10, 15 years, they are big concrete sort of sections, right? That are all then kind of pushed together and fastened. That, to the non-engineer, Dan might not describe it that way, but that's essentially what's going to happen here. The bridge building technology that Maine companies have is going to be brought to bear in this.
All right, brilliant. So that's just kind of what I said. We just wanted to set the stage of, who we are and some current activities and set the foundation for where things are. I'm going to pass it over now to my colleague, Dave, who's going to speak briefly, like I said, to the permitting side, and kind of really a focus on some of what the opportunities going to be for comment. Great.
All right, well, thanks, Rob. I do want to focus on public opportunities for public input and public comment. So the permitting is very complicated. There's a lot of things involved in it. It's a long story. It's a show unto itself. Yes.
All right, if you can, even with your mask, speak a little slower and clearer, it'll
Oh,
help.
great. I'll work on that.
Thank
I'll
you.
enunciate a little more. Thank you. So there are two environmental reviews that will be happening in parallel. One's at the federal level, the other's at the state level. They sort of complement one another. The federal review is an environmental assessment. It's something that's done under the National Environmental Policy Act. It's a big phrase, but it's NEPA. So you'll hear it referred to as an environmental assessment or an EA or a NEPA document or a NEPA review. When you hear those things, it's all referring to the same process that we're going through here. It's something that a couple of federal agencies are leading. The Department of Energy has an obligation to do a NEPA review because they're providing funding to the project. And the Army Corps of Engineers has a similar obligation because they will need to issue permits for the project to go forward. Okay, so the two federal actions that trigger a NEPA review, right? From our standpoint, this is really where the public gets involved. This is it's a long process to prepare this document. And it will take several more months from where we are now. All the information that Rob talked about has to get put in there. We have to make all the decisions about exactly what is going to be in the project and where it's going to be, and where everything's going to happen. It takes time to work that out. It's a lot of engineering. So some months from now, a draft of this document will come out, and that will be opened up for public comment. So you have the opportunity to review it online, make comments, read it, read any sections you're interested in. It's a very comprehensive review. I mean, it's looking at just about anything that could be an environmental effect of a project like this. So it's fish and wildlife, commercial fisheries, marine mammals, historical and cultural resources, of which Montego is an important one. Economics, right? So it's very broad in its scope, right? And it's going to be your go-to. Just anything you want to know about the project, EA is going to have it in there. Well, I mean, maybe not anything, but really anything related to the environmental effects of the project and what the project will consist of and how it will be built and all that. Okay? So that opportunity will come up. We're guessing, and it's still a guess, we're guessing around the beginning of next year. Okay? At the same time that's happening, there's a state review. And the state review, you heard mentioned that it's a demonstration project, so it's got a very special set of rules that apply to it. And the project will be going through that review. And the key parts of that review are these 4 documents right here. There's a report that summarizes what's known about the marine resources in the project area. A monitoring plan to monitor fish and wildlife once the project is operating. A lot of research and interesting monitoring around that. Navigation safety plan, which Dan's going to talk a little bit more about shortly, and a decommissioning plan. How are you going to take it all out when its lifetime has reached its final point, right? When it's ready to come out. Or if for some reason it just needs to come out, right? One key part of these documents, we need to submit them to the Maine Department of Environmental Protection for review. But before we do that, we need to socialize them to the municipalities that are involved in the project, where the project is located. So Monhegan Plantation will receive drafts of these reports from us, and will be probably through Meta, I would imagine, but through some, through some vehicle, right? We'll get them to make them available to the town, the people of the town, or say the plantation, and the opportunity to comment will be offered there, will be invited. Once we get comments from all parties, we then incorporate them, we address them in our plan, we submit it to DEP. Now, once they're with DEP, they generally have a policy to continue to accept questions, comments from the public, from interested parties throughout their review. So again, that will just continue, that will extend if there are questions or anything that anyone would like to make DEP aware of or have questions of. And a lot of that will come back to us. DEP will say, we got these questions from these parties. Could you answer them, please? And DEP may also hold a public meeting as part of their review. And I think I may have left out over here. There will almost definitely be a public meeting from the Department of Energy for this, to initiate this process.
But in January, when a lot of the owners of property are not here,
Right.
Well, so I want to address the timing. So everything on that side, the US Department of Energy really decides when to do it, what to do it, how to do it. Meta, for instance, has asked us to convey to them an interest in holding a public meeting here on the island. That communication has been relayed. All we can do is ask, suggest, encourage. The timing, I think it's fair to say, is very much up in the air in terms of when this process will be ready and when the Department of Energy might hold hearings. So I think it's a little unclear as to when that'll happen. And the other thing is, I think it's too early to say. I don't think we know exactly what mechanism DOE might use. For instance, will they use Zoom or other remote technologies for people to engage in from a distance? So that is all very much to be determined in the future. And again, all we can do is communicate what we hear from the community and tell DOE this is the preference we hear about.
If I hear you correctly, that what you said applies just to the left-hand side? What about the right-hand side?
On the public meeting, yes, it applies to the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, Dave?
Yeah. Well, DEP isn't sure whether they'll hold a meeting or a hearing at this point.
But to accept public comments.
And the public comment stuff is, they'll make it very easy to do that online. And even at DOE, if this arrives at not the best time of year for a meeting here, they would certainly do a Zoom meeting and get the word out so people can participate that way. Right, so they're very interested in the input and the comment. As Dave said, we're sort of guessing around the beginning of the year, so we don't really know.
Yeah.
It could go on it could go further into the season than
It's
that.
gonna expand on the timing piece just a little bit more. And Dave is right, because that you say we don't know exactly.
Mhm.
And there's a reason for that. You know, so we have this great technology from the University of Maine, right? And it's been all this testing, so we believe, you know, that it's going to work. But now it's one thing to understand that it's going to work, it's another thing to figure out how to build it. You know, and how to put it out there. So to pull together all the contracts, all in a manner of trying, you know, to keep the local content in Maine as high as possible, all the jobs, right? So a big part of our focus, there's a lot of different fronts right now, but a big part is how are we gonna build it? You know, and how are the port structures gonna come together for this? You might read about some of that now already as well. You know, so it's a lot of discussion. Until we figure that out, we done that, I call that the what, you know, until we know the what are you gonna do with it, how you gonna do it, and we can't finish this. And until we know that what, that's what's gonna drive a lot of this time. So we believe we'll get through it this summer into the fall, and we're just trying to, we didn't wanna say we don't have any idea, but we believe that it'll probably be early next year that these opportunities will happen.
Are there any existing floating structures anywhere for any purpose that this is based on, or an inspiration for this?
I think we'd have to get Habib from the university
Did you
to
make
figure into that, but this is patented technology. So the concept of it floating is probably not new, but the university, I don't know how many, I think it's 30, how many patents do they hold? They hold numerous patents on the technology. And that's the one that we'll be utilizing.
And does that mean this would be the first floating platform
In North
anywhere
America.
on the globe?
In North America.
Just in North America, thank you.
And possibly the first concrete? Possibly.
And possibly the first concrete.
I think steel is.
Steel is prevailing in, so.
So
This
is
is
there a
really,
preference-
we're crossing a lot of new ground.
Sure.
It's really, so I just wanted to add that for the timing. It's not that we're not monitoring, but there are so many variables at play right now that until we finish those, we really can't.
So there was a 1/8 scale off Castine
Yes.
as a trial. So there has been many steps to proving the technology, including the 1/8 scale that was off Castine, which was the first floating in the US to generate power.
So they've done a lot of testing other technology at other scales. So that's a really key part of this also. This is a full scale test. And that's why it's only one turbine. All right, next slide. Nope. You know, just in the spirit of talking about public input, public opportunities, there are some other reviews, some agency reviews that will be happening that are narrow in scope. They're very specific. So for example, the National Historic Preservation Act, right, and this being Montego, is getting attention under that review. And we're anticipating, we don't exactly know when, but we're anticipating there'll be a public input opportunity specific to that. This is much narrower, but for aviation safety, there's going to be a review by the FAA, and they will probably put a notice out to the aviation community. So if you're a pilot, you may hear from them. But importantly, and tonight, part of tonight's agenda really, and Dan will be talking about this next, the Coast Guard in the marking and lighting and, you know, putting the proper markings on the project are interested in Montego plantations input. All right, there are some options. Dan's been in close communication with them, and we're going to present options and look through them. All right, and then I certainly don't want to leave out on the mainland. There will be local reviews. Rob talked about bringing the power to the mainland, getting the power to the CMP grid. There'll be some construction around that, so there'll be local reviews wherever that happens as well. Those typically come with a fair amount of public opportunity for public input in a local review.
And that's going to be in the Blue Bay area? Is that-
In the Blue Bay area, right? Yep. So these are, you don't need to try to write these down. We're going to get this posted, but there are actually multiple places to get really good information on the project. And NEAV does a great job, frankly, of keeping things up to date with what's happening. And The other 3 sites are up, they're operating, there's information on there that's fairly current. But because we're sort of in this preparing the documents mode, there doesn't seem to be a lot going on, but there's a lot going on, right? So there's a huge amount of work being done in the background to prepare documents for the next step. And, but here's where you can keep track of, particularly here, DOE, for the NEPA review, the opportunity to comment on the project as a whole, a place where the EA will be posted, everything about the project in it. So just want to make sure that you're aware of those.
Thanks, Dave. So I think there were just a couple key points that I want to make sure that we're clear. The first one is that there's a lot that this project will have to go through from a permitting side, to be able to be constructed and operate. And if by no stretch of the imagination is a done deal, it's just going to happen. So there is a lot of activity around that. The timing of it, again, is driven, as I said, as we continue to work through, how this foundation is going to be constructed and operated is going to be the real key driver around when that happens. And the third piece is that as continuing through NEAV or any other entities, there will be public comment. There will be plenty of opportunities as we get further down the process, once the what, as I say, is defined more, that we'll be able to get comments in multiple arenas. So thanks, Dave. So moving on, if we're okay, we're all right. Thank you. Except, the next big piece is really exciting. This is really about the navigational safety plan, and Dan Kennedy is going to speak to that in the same manner. Dan?
Thanks, Rob. So as Dave mentioned, we are currently going through a federal and state review. And as part of that, we are obligated to look at navigation safety. So there's basically 2 reports that we've prepared as part of the navigational safety. And that is a navigational safety risk assessment. That's done for the U.S. Coast Guard. So U.S. Coast Guard is overall interested in this new installation. How will it impact their marine transportation system? How will it impact their mission, search and rescue and so forth? And ultimately, how will the project address navigation safety? In addition to that, there's a state plan that's required through 480HH. And ultimately, the state plan is looking for very similar input, and that's the overall, project safety, the project itself, safety, and then the safety to mariners who are operating. You guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
No, I'm going to take this.
Thank you.
Okay, within this presentation, I'm just talking about the lighting and marking aspects of the navigational safety risk assessment and navigational safety plan. But those reports will be available in there for public review. So there's a lot more detailed information in those, and I'll go through tonight. I'm just going to talk about the lighting and marking. So here we are on Monhegan Island. The test site is to the south of the island. That's shown in the pink area here. And there are actually 2 different systems that we're looking at. It's one turbine, a single turbine, but there's 2 areas that we're looking at possibly placing that turbine. So that's in the green and the light blue here. And I'll talk a little bit more about what those 2 systems are. They have different anchoring systems, which requires a different spot within the test site where they could be located. So this navigational safety assessment, it looks at the above water portions of the structure. So as I was showing you guys, the turbine structure and the top of the foundation, how would we light and mark that for navigational safety? And it also addresses the parts of the system that are below water. So the rest of the foundation, the anchor system, and there's a dynamic cable, which I'll show you guys an image of in a couple of slides. The 2 anchor systems that I was talking about, one's called a catenary system. That's basically an all-chain anchor system. And the other one's a hybrid system, which consists of chain and synthetic rope. The footprint of the hybrid system is smaller than the catenary system. So that is the preferred direction we'd like to go with the anchoring. However, we're running through an engineering analysis now to make sure that system is feasible. The university has gotten grant money from the DOE to study it. We do testing on the synthetic rope. There's a whole program associated with looking at that design and making sure it's feasible. And that's ongoing. This gives you a kind of picture of what's above water and what's below water on the structure. So those previous images were just really showing the foundation and the turbine. This also shows the anchor system. You know, this is a cross section, so we're only showing 2 anchor lines, but there's actually 3 total. One comes off of each of the columns. And here, this is the hybrid system. So the top portion of that of the mooring line is chain. This system here, which is about 300 feet long, 330 feet long, is a polyester rope. So think of like the lines you tie off a big ship. It's similar to that. It'll be, you know, a big 8 to 10 inch diameter rope, and that'll connect down to another piece of chain. So this synthetic rope doesn't do as well if it touches down on the seabed because it can get abraded. So that's why you use another section of the chain down at the bottom. This allows you, the hybrid system allows you to go from an outer perimeter, so this far outer edge on the hybrid systems about 1,300 feet out, whereas on the catenary system, you're anywhere between 2,300 to 2,900 feet away from the center of the structure. So it does really provide you with a much smaller footprint if you can make the hybrid system work. So that's the reason we're studying that now. The university is studying that to reduce it. When you're looking at those 2 systems, you also have to look at, well, what's the resilience of the system? So you think of the anchor chains, each link is about this tall, this wide. So it's really a big anchor chain. Obviously, that's very resilient to a fishing line going over it, right? That's not going to cut that system. The polyester rope is also very resilient, but less than steel, right? So that's what we're studying. So it's, we can build it this way. Next. This is what the dynamic cable looks like. So, you know, I mentioned we're looking at, you know, all these things subsurface and above the water. So we have the 3 mooring lines, and then we also have this dynamic cable. What the dynamic cable does is it takes the power that's generated from the turbine and it brings it down to the static export cable that will run subsea back to the mainland. The reason you need this dynamic cable is that because it's a floating turbine, it moves in the water column. It has a watch circle that it moves around. And so it needs a flexible line underneath it. So as it moves, this line can move. So this line will contract and it'll expand. It's in a lake, they call it a lazy wave. So it allows the structure to move through water. And we'll talk about how we're going to mark that. There's guidelines around how you mark these offshore structures. So this would be the same as a fixed bottom marking system. Like, I don't know if you guys have heard about the Vineyard Wind project that's happening off in Massachusetts. That project is already fully permitted, and they have a specific marking system that's been established by BOEM and the states to say what colors these need to be. So the upper parts of this are like a grayish white, and then the other feature on a color scheme is that the columns are all painted yellow. So you'll be able to see that clearly during the day. The tower nacelle will be marked for aviation. Obviously, when you have a structure that's 700 feet in the air, there's certain requirements by FAA. So what FAA requires is that the nacelle is lit, and because the structure is over 699 feet, the tower also needs to be lit. So you'll have two lights up at the top, the nacelle, they're red, and then there needs to be at least 3 around the tower. We're looking right now, probably having 4 around the tower, so that's highly visible for aviation.
Those are flashing lights?
Yes, they're flashing. And there's the intensity and so forth, that's all defined by FAA. So it'll be all FAA according to the guidelines. So we're looking at then how to discuss how we're going to market from the air. It's also very important to be marked for mariners, right? So if you're in a boat and you're moving in and around the structure, you need to be able to see it. You need to be able to see it at night. You need to be able to see it in, or know where it is in inclement weather. At the very outer edges, we're looking at putting buoys. So those would be at the anchor locations. And we've been in coordination with the U.S. Coast Guard as to what type of buoys to use. What they've indicated to us that they want to see is a danger buoy. That's a white buoy. It has orange horizontal lines, top and bottom. And then it has a diamond in the middle of the buoy. And that diamond, that identifies what the danger is in the area. So here we would say, you know, offshore wind turbine in that, in this area here. They would all have.
What's the distance from one of those foundation points out to the buoy?
Yeah, so it depends on if it's the catenary system or the hybrid system. So on the hybrid system, it's about 1,300 feet from here to here.
From the boat?
Yeah, from the center point. And then on the catenary, it's about 2,300 to 2,900.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
So,
that's half a mile.
So even if all of this proved to be wonderful technology, you couldn't have another turbine any closer than half a mile from that one.
yeah, I mean, you look at, they're still looking at spacing for these. The fixed bottom foundations are now about a mile apart.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, so,
But
but still looking at on this technology for next scale projects, how the distance.
So you can see what the benefits that Dan was talking about of having the shorter cable, for the hybrid, if you will, right? You know.
And, you know, this distance is 1,300, but that's not all mooring line in the water column. You know, there's a good portion of that just lays on the seabed, particularly with the catenary system. Basically, the catenary system uses that laid chain on the seabed to help dampen the movement. Right, so it's using all that wood. Yeah, seabed, that's how it's designed.
I have a question, basic engineering question. I've been thinking about this for a long time. I mean, last 45 minutes. With the tower, it's the only wind turbine I've seen with a tower that could rock back and forth. How is the spinning? What's the idea of keeping that turbine spinning with the tower moving
Yeah.
different ways?
Yeah, so the university has done actually physical testing on this. So they run all this engineering analysis, right? They size the structure. It's the reason why it has to be 287 feet in between the columns is so it has this stability. So it doesn't heave and roll and pitch any more than a defined angle that they set. So it has to be within this range. And they design the size of it to be stable in the water. And that's also the reason why they have it 66 feet under the water. So in that draft helps its stability and helps it dampen.
So it will drift, but it doesn't. It's not
Right.
like pitch.
Yeah, it doesn't pitch, roll, and heave more than, they have defined as part of their engineering design.
And I'm not a physics student, so my ignorance comes out, but you have hurricanes, you have huge storm surge.
Yeah,
How do you factor that?
so ABS has a guideline, so that the structure is actually classified by ABS, which is the American Bureau of Shipping. So they classify all ships, and they're actually also classifying this. They've developed a floating offshore wind turbine manual. And that manual is what they do for their design. That has all their guidelines about what this needs to do for stability, safety, how the mooring chain needs to be analyzed. All those things are within their guideline. And right now, what the university is doing is that they're taking that design they've done, they give it over to ABS. ABS does review and comment and make sure that it's all in accordance with their guides. And in the end, they end up classifying it the same way we wish.
Are there gonna be any bells, horns, any sort of noise factor whatsoever connected with this?
Yes, and I'll get to that as like it's like the last 3 slides. But, so I'll cover that coming up. Almost there. So yeah, those last thing on these, they'll be lit with like a 5 nautical mile range. You get to see these out in the distance when you're out as a man.
White lights or red?
These are white. So all these lights will be from sunset to sunrise, so they're only for navigation at night. These are white. There's a requirement for a light on the structure, on the base of the structure, which is yellow, and then the lights on the tower and the cellar red. That's for all the existing guidelines. It's regulations. So these are the yellow lights. This is the center column. The center column has a work platform, and it has an access point to get into the tower section. On that center column, we place yellow blinking navigation lights, and also an AIS unit. That's this unit here. What the AIS does, it's basically a location device for the structure that a mariner can use. So they can, they can have their AIS system on their boat, and they can see the structure. So in addition to the physical markings, this will also be marked on the NOAA charts. So when a mariner is looking at their chart, they can say, okay, yes, here's a floating wind turbine. It's in this location. Here where the anchor system is and the cable. And there'll also be we're proposing a note. So we'll provide all that information to NOAA, so they can put that on their chart. And we're proposing a note, and I'll just read that note because I think it's an important one. So vessels entering and departing Penobscot Bay near Monhegan Island, Maine, should exercise caution in the area of the floating wind turbine generator located in position northing and westing. All vessels and persons are advised to avoid anchoring, diving, dredging, dumping, mobile fishing, trawling, cable laying, or conducting salvage activities in this area. So this is a guidance, an advisory. There's no federal exclusion zone in the area. And I think it's important to note that the advice is against mobile fishing, so basically dragging through the area, but not, it does not apply to the lobster fishermen who could work in and operate around the area. They'll know where these anchor lines are and where the dynamic cable is, and be able to work in and around this. So we're working very closely with the local fleet, which their needs are satisfied. There's a lot of words on this slide, but this is starting to introduce what we're talking about with the sound signal. So the sound signal, which is also called a foghorn, this is what you were asking about, is a requirement underneath the 480H permit that we're looking at. So that's the statewide permit. And it's also a requirement in the navigation circular that we're doing, that we're required to follow to develop the navigation safety risk assessment for the US Coast Guard. So those are the two up top here, where it says that this is a requirement to do a sound signal. Now, there are different, while the Coast Guard and the state say that sound signal is needed, they don't, they're not very prescriptive in exactly what that sound, how long that sound signal needs to go off, what the range of that sound signal is, and how it's activated. There is guidance from BOEM and also the ILA, which is like an international marine aids guidance about duration, range of a fog signal. And what we wanted to talk with you guys about here tonight is kind of going through those options based on the available guidance and talking to you what you would like to see, as part of our project. We have had lots of conversations with the US Coast Guard about this, and they specifically requested that we come out and talk to you and say, okay, here's the options available. This is how we can, have this device on the structure and get your opinion. So that's part of here to talk that through. So in terms of keying a sound signal, well, first, just so you guys know what these things look like and what they are. This kind of shows it right here on the right side of the page. It's basically a plastic housing with a sound device in the middle of it that attaches to the railing structure of the center column of the turbine. So that previous image I was showing with that center column, it would be on the railing, and it needs to be 360 degrees sound is a requirement. So anywhere that you're moving around the structure, you would be able to hear it. The idea of the sound signal is that it's to go off during inclement weather. So when you have a visibility of less than 2 nautical miles, you want the sound signal to sound so mariners know where the structure is. There's 2 ways that you can basically key that sound signal. It's with a visibility meter. So the meter would be placed on the structure. When visibility around the structure is less than 2 nautical miles, it would automatically sound. Or there's what's called an MRAS system. The MRAS system would allow a mariner with their VHF radio to, if it's a foggy conditions, they know in their chart, if they're nearby this structure, they'd be able to key in 5 times to the radio frequency of 83A, and then it would start going off. So they key it in. So there are 2 different ways that this can be activated. Once it's activated, there are options for its range, which the standard range, or what BOEM recommends for guidance, is that the range would be 2 nautical miles. So you hear 2 nautical miles away. The devices can also be purchased at half nautical mile, which is obviously a less lower range. And there's options on the duration they run once it's sounded. So BOEM recommends that once a sound signal is sounded, that it goes off for 45 minutes. The device itself can be set at 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45, and 60 minutes. Those are different options. And we did some analysis on this sound and what it would sound like when it gets to the island, right? Obviously, we're looking to be the project to be as least disruptive as possible to the island. And so we looked at, well, if it's this 2 nautical mile range, we have 3 of them around, what does that sound like when the sound reaches the island? So it's approximately 60 decibels. And 60 decibels is like normal conversation or background music in terms of like your level of what you hear. And that's with 3 of them around the 2 nautical mile range. We also did an analysis to say, all right, well, if you reduce that and say you said that you only had 2 nautical mile range facing away from the island, and half nautical mile range towards the island, you reduce that decibel level by about 5 to 10 dB. And, it's kind of gets you, back towards here. So 60 is normal conversation, background music. 40 is average home noise. So with the half nautical mile range sound signal, you'd be kind of in between those two. Just to get an idea of where they sound. So if you go to the next.
Sure.
This kind of summarizes, and actually before I summarize it, does anybody have any questions on that? 'Cause I know it's a lot of information.
Okay, so I live on the south end of the island,
Okay.
exactly overlooking this project.
Yeah.
And so I gather from what you just said, this wouldn't be sounding all the time.
Right.
It would only be sounding in cases of fog
Yes,
or less than 2 mile visibility,
correct.
and a possibility of being activated by marine vessels
Yes,
only.
yes,
That's a possibility.
correct.
Okay, so are these sound systems connected to the buoys themselves, which, as you said, are
No,
quite
it's
a distance, or are they only on the tower
on the
itself?
center of the tap, the center, at the center of the center column
Yeah,
on the platform, that's where they would connect,
yeah.
not at the buoys.
So, living with foghorns is incredibly disturbing, even as you say it's such and such a decibel. And we had some years ago on Banana
Mhm.
that were installed by the Coast Guard, but they were not cared for properly, and they just rang all the time, 24 hours a day, and drove everybody insane.
Mhm.
So what kind of pitch, what kind of frequency, how can we minimize this to the max? I'm sure everybody on this island's gonna agree with wanting to minimize sound.
Yeah. So when you look at these kind of 3 items here, where it's the activation, signal, range, and duration, I'm not sure about the one that was here previously, but it sounds like that was on a visibility meter. Right, so,
Probably,
The-
but
the-
it didn't work.
right,
So
those
it ran
those
24
meters
hours a day.
can be sensitive, and it depends on,
And then when the Coast Guard was called to correct it, they never came.
yeah. We're gonna be responsible for operation, so whatever systems out there, we'll maintain.
And is it a high pitch noise? Could it be a low pitch noise?
But it's a standard pitch.
It's a
that's
standard
operated.
pitch, yeah.
Every foghorn in the state of Maine sounds at the same pitch.
Yeah. Same pitch. But there is differences you can look at in duration. So say you had a keyed system, which was the MRAS. Kind of our thought around the keyed system is there's a possibility, and we talked about this with the Coast Guard, of reducing the duration. So
Yes.
so 45 minutes is Bones' recommendation. Like once it goes for 45 minutes. If you had a keyed system, the option would be if you could decrease the time, say to 15 minutes. And then if the mariner at the end of those 15 minutes still needed to hear that sound signal, they could rekey. The downside about a keyed system is anybody with a marine radio can key it. So, the hope is that that's only done by a mariner when they can't see. But you could also have somebody who is kind of playing around and keys it in. You wouldn't be able to do that with the visibility meter, but with the visibility meter, you should have a longer duration, right, of the sound signal. So that's like the trade-off of those two. They both
what
have
happens
pros
at
and
night?
cons.
Which is also a time of low visibility. Is it going to go on every night, all night?
No. It won't go on throughout the night. It has the sensor knows night and day and
The
That's it.
visibility is for moisture.
Yes.
for
Okay.
fog, so not for
Right.
daylight.
Not for
Right,
daylight,
right,
okay,
right.
thanks.
Yeah. No, it won't go off, it won't go off. And then on the range, you know, you have this 2 nautical mile versus a half nautical mile. So you do get a decrease in that level of sound towards the island if you go down to the half nautical mile towards that.
And you're willing to work with the residents of this island to minimize it
Oh,
to
absolutely.
the max?
So just to make a point, the Coast Guard wants the safest standard. And so in order for them to accept a less disruptive, 15 minutes, half mile, they want feedback from the community, both from the fishing fleet and from the residents, that you're willing to have a slightly less safe, sound signal. So for commercial fishermen, for pilots, for mariners, we depend on electronics at this point, not necessarily fog signals or lighting. So it's less of a concern to mariners, if you will. But in order for the Coast Guard to approve, say, a half mile, that's why it's important to weigh in your feedback if you would like to have a less disruptive signal out here. It makes no difference to the developer from a project perspective, which one it is, but it does make a difference to the Coast Guard.
I appreciate that you're looking for feedback from us, but we're a really small sample.
Yes,
Yeah, I'm
we
here,
see that.
and I'm here seasonally. So how is this, what's the process for
Yes. how would we
reaching the decision
organize
on this set of questions?
That's a really good question. I don't think we've gotten that far. We
Well, it's very important to have
So
a
we
lot of
reached,
input.
we reached most of the fishermen today, so they'll be the ones fishing around it. We were hoping there was a greater turnout tonight.
Yep.
There isn't. We haven't had a chance to talk about that yet and decide how we're going to reach out to one.
But Dan, let's also talk about the process for those who are here or friends and neighbors or others you may encounter to give the feedback. So we want feedback right now. You can give us feedback immediately after the meeting this evening and for the next week or so, right? So the ballot box is open, so to speak, right? The opportunity for input
Yeah.
In this
We've got these-
particular week, so.
in this
So
particular
do
week.
you
or
have
maybe
actual
on-
printouts?
So that.
What's that?
Do you have
everybody's
actual
out to
printouts?
everyone, and
Yes.
then we've
Yeah,
got
so
big
I,
stacks,
I
you
do
know,
the mailing list
on other residents.
and I
Okay.
put an email out to our mailing list that's on moheganenergy.info.
Can't hear you.
There's a mailing list that Metif has created. It's, you can sign up on moheganenergy.info if you're not already signed up, and I plan to send this out to everyone on that list.
Because we represent our 17 favorite relatives. Jointly going to classes on this side of the island, not that. but They're not here.
You're right there. It is in the-
Okay, and then Carly, how many people are on this list?
So the more weight you can give.
I don't know the
I don't know,
number
I
off the
need to-
top of my head, but I believe it's around 160.
Really?
It might be more, it might be less. That's the number that I have.
And then basically the feedback that we receive, we're going to incorporate that into this navigational safety risk assessment report that goes to the coast.
Are you University of Maine?
No, I'm with Diamond Offshore Wind, so I'm with the developer. So,
Nobody is here, nobody from the university is here.
So yeah, we'll take that. And we've developed this report with the consultant, a specialty consultant, who's an expert in developing these types of reports.
Is there any way we can hear a sample of what it would be like?
You mean to compare the two different sound levels or just the typical foghorn sound?
Go in a boat to the to the
Oh,
2.5 mile location,
I see what you're
run the
saying.
horn, run
Yeah,
what it would be like for us.
Distance, the actual distance in which it would be and what you're comparing it to, I think would be kind of hard to replicate exactly. Understanding, what distance are you hearing it from, right? And to be able to replicate that consistently, we have to think through how to do that.
but to that question, if you could devise such a thing, I think what we're facing with the Coast Guard is a limited number of choices. And I think what I'm hearing is please pick the lowest in every.
The
category,
least disruptive,
right?
yeah.
The least disruptive, which is pretty straightforward feedback to give to the Coast Guard. We just can't do it on your behalf, right? We've been asked to get input on it, so. Yes, you might say it's a small sample, but you guys cared enough to be here. Right, so that means something else. Right?
So it's less disruptive between the visibility meter or the MRASS. I would think the secondary would be the least disruptive, correct?
So it depends, because you may have, so I live in Stonington, we have a foghorn. It's a different scenario, but we opted against being able to key it because we didn't want everyone keying it whenever they wanted to for no reason. So there's kind of a balancing act there.
Is there a place where that is happening?
It does happen in various places on the coast.
Okay.
The same way we get hoax US Coast Guard calls and all of the sort of, other,
So it happens, the visibility.
yeah, nonsense. Well, I mean, it's sort of 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
But your foghorn in Stonington is on the shore?
No, it's on Mark Island, so it's right at the end of our thoroughfare. So it's,
Okay.
for a little bit further than, sorry, I always pronounce it wrong, Manana. So it's a little bit further than that away from our community, but not very far. So it's across the thoroughfare on Mark Island. We have a visibility meter.
How often does it go off?
Well, we have a lot of fog in Maine, so pretty often. I don't know what our duration is. So for me, it's always been there and it's just part of the background noise of my life. I don't even really notice it. I live about probably a mile away from it, so I can hear it from my house. But yeah, I don't know what our duration sounding is.
Does the Coast Guard have a number of decibels below which it won't go? I just remember years and years ago, when the foghorn was still operating on Manana, it was a lower sound. And then when they automated it, it's a higher sound. And the lower sound was less bothersome.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I don't know.
Good question.
Yeah.
So you mean lower in pitch? or-
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the one that is an automated one is definitely more noticeable and it's a higher pitch.
More shrill.
I don't know, but it's a good question and we could follow up on it.
Yeah, see if
Yeah.
there's different models. I mean, my understanding is there's really just one pitch, but that might not be the case, so.
Yeah.
something to look into.
Yeah, with the supplier we've been working with, they didn't offer different pitches. as
But
part
they
of the-
might if you
but-
ask them to specifically, given feedback.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, we can talk to them about it. Okay.
And again, just to reiterate what Dan said, so to the extent that you all could share with your neighbors that these questions are happening, this exact presentation is going, with all the information, is going to be on the meta, posted on the site. But to the much extent that the mailer or whatever, if not to run on it, the deck, this deck with this question is going to be posted as well, right? And then if we need any additional questions or anything, we do to follow up with us, we do what we can to help. But we really want, I think one of the points that I think was clear that Dan was trying to communicate is that our options are not to do it for this project is not an option, but we do have how we can do it is.
Yeah.
And that's to the extent that the feedback we can get, and the Coast Guard has been very direct with us, is that, if you don't get any different feedback, it's gonna be what they want,
Which is
Yeah.
2 nautical miles.
which is 2 nautical miles, which we believe you could probably improve upon for the impact, the local impact.
So since this has also been on Zoom, is there a way that it will be recorded somehow so that we could get in touch with our family members and say, if you come here to this link, you can hear what we've heard tonight?
Yes, this is being recorded and it will be posted on the website as well.
And so if they go to the website, they can dial that up somehow and at least hear what we've heard?
Yes, it might take me a couple days, but it will be there.
When should they reply?
I'm sorry.
By when should they reply?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that actually relates to a question that I have in the chat. The slide says by June 29th. Is there any way to extend that is the question?
how much time would?
We think's
would be
reasonable.
helpful?
We
Yeah,
want to
what's
get the
reasonable?
feedback to them as soon as reasonable. But if we need it more than
Well,
1
June
week,
29th is not reasonable because you barely get to all your relatives who
Uh-huh.
aren't always in one
Yeah.
place.
Yeah, I think when we were thinking about the 29th, it was for the group that was here.
Okay.
I can understand if you're, trying to
And a
extend
lot
that.
of folks who live
Yeah.
on the island all summer are just coming in now or haven't quite arrived.
So I'm also getting the sense that the consensus will be the least disruptive.
Yeah.
So 15 minutes, half mile.
we could probably extend that to make sure there's enough time to, instead of 1 to 3 weeks.
3 weeks would be better.
So for a 3-week period, that people could talk about it, look at information, ask questions. But we do want to get back to the Coast Guard as reasonable. Maybe, like Dan said, I think our vision initially was that we would take the
There'd be a
impact from
lot.
the people here and be able to bring it back. But it's a very valid point, that maybe we should expand that. Which I think we could reasonably.
Yes.
I mean, the consensus clearly seems to be the least disruptive. I haven't heard anyone speak up louder.
Well,
Well,
hardly anybody.
I don't
here.
think we'll hear that.
I don't know who would.
But- Yeah, I mean, that can really be great on your nerves.
Yeah.
So that, we knew coming out here that would be the preference, but we need to have it like a hard copy to provide to the
Yeah.
Coast Guard that says, hey, it is accepted by the community to have a less safe, if you will, sound signal. And
Higher
also
risk.
mariners.
Was that the feedback from there?
Yeah, well, I mean, we rely on GPS.
And you have talked to the folks who are in the boats in this community, to the fishermen, to the
Yes.
tuna fishermen, as well as the lobster fishermen and anybody else.
Yes, we met with them earlier
Because
today.
when they're on the water, they obviously want to know where this thing is.
Oh, brilliant.
Right, right, yes.
And they agreed.
Yeah, so
Minimal.
commercial fishermen don't really rely on sound signals anymore. We rely on GPS.
Yeah, we took feedback from them. We gave them the same kind of questionnaire today, so we collected
Yeah.
those. And then also told them, hey, think about it and come back to us as well. We had to be-
Are you gonna, at any point in this presentation, talk about the noise that the turbine is going to make itself?
it's
Yeah,
not
we
big.
can talk some about it. There's been some modeling done of the sound from the operation of the turbine. We had a sound engineer do some modeling to project what the sound is that would reach the island. It sounds like right where you are. The sound levels with a fully operating turbine, and I know this is just number, but I'll try to put it in some context. By the time they reach the island, we'll be in the low 30s.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean anything to
Doesn't
me
mean
at all.
anything, that's the rate.
And even if you speak in a quiet voice, if it's a pulsing
Understand?
noise,
Yeah, so there hasn't been a prediction here that the pulsing would be pronounced. The phenomena that happen onshore because of terrain happen over the water. Now, sound can carry differently over water as well, but the same phenomena that you hear about or that you might be aware of for an onshore arrangement happen here. Just physically just different around it. The low 30s, put it in context, without the turbine here, that's around the lowest sound levels they documented on the island.
Is it called ambient condition?
Ambient conditions. So like in the high 20s to low 30s is kind of the quiet ambient condition on the island. Really, that just comes down to distance.
are we
right?
hearing motor?
Could be wind that they're picking up or surf or. No, not so much motors because that
I
kind of,
mean,
that
from
tends to
the
be.
turbine itself, are we
trans-
hearing
Oh, no, no,
motor?
You're hearing the swoosh of blades through
That's
the
what
air.
I mean.
Yeah.
Pulsing.
So it's a broadband kind of white noise sound for the most part.
Because noise is one of those sound noises, one of those difficult ones when you're just thinking of numbers. I totally respect and understand where you're coming from, but but like a 0 dBA world doesn't exist, right? And so that lower, at least unless you're in dome islands or into something that's designed to keep all that out. But in that 30 part, it's like is what it's talking about, like really your ambient sound around you, and with the understanding that it's that swoosh, because it is the culling is up through the air, which is that loudest part of it, at that distance is, we hope to be, non-disruptive, at that point. It shouldn't be too much of a concern, but it's valid as something going through. And in all the documentation and all the permits that Dave was speaking to earlier, one of them, is noise.
Right, it'll be evaluated.
It will be evaluated fully throughout in that application as well.
And here's another point maybe to help. The state standard on shore, for nighttime, is 42 decibels. So a facility is allowed by state law to emit 42 decibels to be the sound that a receiver hears in the facility. That's considered quiet, if it's the nighttime standard. So this is a solid 10 decibels below that. This is the second time I get to say this today, but 10 decibel change halves the sound suppression because it's a logarithmic scale. So reduce the sound by 10 decibels, it's actually half as loud as it was. So this is about half the sound level of the state's lowest standard.
I'm just gonna weigh in here, having done a lot of TBA around airboats in this last session. If you're doing a shoreline test, how you're measuring this, if you're doing a JAE 70, for example, how you measure decibels is really tricky.
Yeah.
You can manipulate numbers, frankly, to do whatever.
Yeah.
I will say that for watercraft, and I don't know how this is going to be classified, any watercraft other than airboats is 75, and it can be up to 90 for airboats.
Yeah.
So I would just pay really close attention to how they are measuring. And I do get a little worried when I hear this, oh, don't worry, it's just like the stationary, whatever. It's not.
Right.
It
So I
is
don't
not.
don't mean to be, don't worry, but this was a rigorous analysis done by, very reputable engineer who has done a lot of this with onshore wind, where there recently new standards were enacted because of issues like what you're talking about.
Right.
So very specific standards about how to do all of that. So he is actually involved in putting that together. I would say he was the person who was putting it together.
Is there any way they could demonstrate to us?
What did you do for DT?
Well, I mean, it's not, I don't know, Dave, it's not entirely an exact analogous situation, but there are onshore turbines throughout Maine. None are super close to Port Clyde, but they exist.
Yeah.
And if you want to get them, an appropriate distance away from them, and of course, in that case, it would be an entire array, right? Because there's, in most cases, there are, many turbines, not just one.
Yeah.
That is a real world experience. Again, it's not the same as the environment's a little bit different, but it is.
If you could stand, 2+ miles away from an onshore operating, and you would have multiple turbines, as Dave said, some sense of.
Well,
kind of
usually on land, you can't hear it from 2 miles away, but water's different. Yeah.
The thing that happens on land that is different here, and I've read the engineer's report, one of the issues that was revealed, I guess, in the studies when wind energy was first being developed onshore in Maine, was you can have the wind blowing up at the top of the turbine and have it be very still at ground level, especially if there's terrain. So you can be in the lee of a hill, or you can, different circumstances can create that wind aloft but quiet below. And that's when the sound from the wind turbine is most pronounced. Right? You've got this thing operating at full power, several hundred feet above the ground, but just because of conditions, it's quiet. So you've got nothing creating ambient sound around you, right? According to the engineer, it's much less likely to happen in the winter. Right? You're going to have, it's windy at the top of the turbine. It's windier than it is at the surface of the water. But it won't be still at the surface of the water. his view is, you know, that sound will not propagate in the same way that you might see on the. But, you know, we could, I think maybe the idea of looking at an onshore installation is a good start. Again, maybe putting it to scale, we're at 2+ miles away here, let's say 2.5. Vinyl Haven, which had wind turbine noise issues, those were at 800 or 900 feet away. We're talking about 10,000, 12,000 feet. You know, in this instance. Mars Hill was an early project, had some noise complaints. Homes were 1,000 feet or 1,100 feet. That's where the complaints came from. So maybe a little farther, maybe as far as 1,800 or 2,000 feet. But again, we're at maybe 10 times that distance. So it is, distance is kind of the great equalizer on sound, right? It only carries so far. I don't mean to diminish it, but my expectation would be, there'll be circumstances where you'd say, I can do that. Right? That, I would expect, I would take that as an assumption. But you're very far away.
Have you been to Block Island?
Yesterday,
How was it there?
I couldn't hear it over the nose of the ferry.
Yeah.
Oh,
You're on
right,
right.
We are.
the whole time.
But I'm not aware of any noise complaints from Long Island.
And the distance from the island to the
3
turbine.
miles.
3 miles, yeah. The, I've seen some around that, I can't represent it, I can't claim to represent it, but what I've seen was along the lines of it was not, or even maybe all of them.
I think what we could do is, we could take as an action from this, you know, to do a little brainstorming, you know, to see if there's any of things that we could put it. I appreciate the improvements in the taste, right? And so if there are things that we could point to, or in which to say, if you go here at this distance, you know, it'd be similar, but the exact replicate it is going to be, but I think what we need to do is to take some expert brains together, you know, and see if we can't come up with an option or two for consideration, understanding that it wouldn't be perfect. But I think we could definitely take that away as an action.
Just on an entirely different point, I know that originally, one of the things this island is blessed with is being on migratory flyways of migrating birds, and they get a lot of their tourist trade because of the migrating birds, and even the ones that don't migrate but that nest in the area. How are these, both the turbine lights and the noise, how do they affect those migration patterns? And have you had people checking that in this particular area, it's not a direct flight path? Because it would really affect not only the birds, but the island, if that were a problem.
Yeah, that's something I've looked into also, and I've reviewed the material for it. I mean, you may be aware, I mean, you probably better than me, the project's been in the works for a long time.
Yes.
Right, and there's a lot that was put into the selection of this location,
Okay.
right? And multiple agencies are involved, Fish and Wildlife agencies are
Yeah.
involved, and others. But with recognition for that as well, that the island is and with a lot of islands along the coast, right, they'll end up being a landing place for migratory birds. Right, they go on by the
Yeah.
water, and they land on the island either because of weather or to
Yeah.
So there were studies done, they're several years old now, but it's all done around that initial work to assess the site. So there's radar work done around like migratory bird flight patterns.
Yep.
There was acoustic recording, the calls of the birds, you know, here, there's a good baseline of what, right?
Thank you.
And they didn't raise any huge red flags, but it does exactly what you said it does. I mean, there are these phenomena happening here.
Yeah.
And then as part of that, one of those plans that goes into the state permitting process is Fish and Wildlife monitoring. So similar studies will be done once it's in operation. we would be looking for indications of some kind of adverse, something that's maybe unexpected.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So just to follow up on that a little bit, there is a question in the chat that says, what studies of impacts to bird, bat, and marine species are you doing / have done to make these data comprehensive for the final specs of the single 11-watt turbine? So you spoke of the studies that were done
Sure.
previously. So is there any change to the current?
So once we're actually right now in the process of working with the university and others to define just what we would do now to best evaluate what's happening with birds and bats at the project. It's not possible, for instance, to put a radar unit on the project, right? You can't put it on the turbine. But there are other things we can do potentially with visual work, like actual observers, and the acoustic work that is being proposed, both for birds and bats. So bats are usually done with acoustics. You're detecting their presence and abundance. You get an indication of their abundance using acoustics. And so we're using, right now, we're pretty sure we use similar technology, acoustics for birds. The question is, what else might we do? And we're looking into that right now. We want to make it better than, if you will, putting radar on the island, which is 2.5 miles from the turbine. And the radar isn't necessarily going to pick up what we want, the information we want at the turbine location. So we're looking at other things we can do with the turbine.
Maybe Block Island is also studying that because they're another trap island for birds. So
Yeah.
I don't know whether you're enough in contact with them to know what kinds of studies they've been able to do since they had their
Yeah.
turbines up.
Absolutely, absolutely. Our team are drawing on what's being done there, what works, what doesn't work so well. Wind, other wind projects, there are a fair number of examples towards south, but they aren't quite developed.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a lot of thought being put into this. We've got brains that have been involved in the most recent stuff.
Thank you.
I have a couple more questions in the chat here. I'll read this one first since it kind of follows up to what you were just saying. Will the draft EA provide detail of the monitoring, reporting to the public, and mitigation measures New England Aqua Venice will take once the project is operational to deal with any negative impacts to avian, bat, and marine species?
Yeah. Right. So that's an obligation. That's an obligation under 480HA, so the state process. That's specifically what the statute says, actually, almost verbatim.
Okay.
So that's a requirement. And that will be in the environmental assessment because the same information will be ported over to the EA, so that's they're consistent.
Okay. And the other question is New England Aqua Venice still working with Bigelow Laboratory as the cable landing site in Booth Bay?
So we continue to assess opportunities in East Booth Bay. You were asking exactly who we were working with. We're still assessing the opportunities in Booth Bay. East Booth Bay.
So that's not a done deal.
Yeah. So until things are finalized, it won't be complete.
That's all I have on this end.
Right? Good questions.
Yeah. The next slide was actually questions and answers. My
I think
apologies.
we've done that.
But we can keep going. Like I said, we're here for you.
Yeah.
I have a question again out of my ignorance, and I know that the train has left the station or the boat has left the pier. Why was this particular site chosen? I understand you wanted the depth of 300 feet. Did you, and where else were various sites reviewed as potentials? And why was this one particularly finalized?
That's a good project history.
Yeah. So there's, this was part of an extensive work, that started over 10 years ago.
I understand.
To assess, and the project, right now, the NEAV, as we went in, what is New England Aqua Venice, did not select the location, right? So we weren't part, of that process. That was that went through the state, the multi-agency state process, looking everything from the size of the fleets to the depths of water, that there were multiple assessments and in consultations with the University of Maine, in other areas that might do. And it came up with quite an extensive initial list, of locations that, as I understand, through consultations and continued work through the state agencies were assessed and whittled down and whittled down and whittled down until it came here. So that is, like I said, that's something that the New England Aquaventus, that was completed before.
Yeah.
We came in, our job has been to develop, but our understanding that there was quite extensive state multi-agency, process.
And there are resources on the internet through the state website that give more background on that.
Yeah, there's volumes of material.
Yeah.
I think part of it was the high cost of electricity that we're paying for now, so there was the project itself, benefit of testing that new technology, as well as providing Monhegan with electricity. So that was the original plan. The cable would come from the turbine and power and help offset our electricity.
And that has not happened because the island chose to get monetary recompense instead of that? Because they're not getting the electricity from.
That is correct.
Correct, we're not getting electricity from this.
Okay.
Good question.
Also, the University of Maine stated in one of the meetings going back several years that this island was chosen because of the small number of fishermen that they would have to compensate. They came right out and said that. Okay. Versus putting it somewhere like Damerscott, where there are no residents that would be impacted, but more fishermen would have to be paid. So that was a big reason. Is there any possibility of amending the exact location of the turbine? So could it possibly be moved further east so that it is not in the lives of all of the South End residents 24 hours a day for 20 years?
Test area, if you go back.
I looked at the depth of the water there.
Yeah.
If it were to be moved just around Gull Rock, the depth of the water is pretty similar. Let's say moved instead of here, more here. Not there. Oh, okay, more here.
It has to be within this pink area.
Why?
Because that's the state defined test area for the University of Maine. It cannot be outside.
Could the legislature amend that location?
Not that I'm aware of.
Well, I mean, constitutionally, the legislature could always change whatever they want to change. I think it's probably fair to say it's unlikely that there would be a high level of interest in reopening that decision.
It's a small amendment. It's going to affect our property values, all of us significantly, and our whole experience here on Monhegan significantly. And if you were to move it around, it will not affect any resident at all.
I'm just, you asked the question, do I think that it would be changed? My sense is it would be, they would not be particularly inclined, but I'm not, I think
Okay.
saying an opinion, I mean, in
I
terms of the
did
value.
speak with one of our legislators, who
Okay.
said that she may want to work on it. So what do you think,
What do I think?
having been?
Sorry, I was
That
talking
world.
to one of your legislators, so I missed the first part of the conversation.
The question is, would the legislature redraw the boundaries of the test area? And I said, of course, constitutionally, they always could. They could do whatever they so choose. But but I think there would be a certain reluctance to reopen decision.
Yeah, I think that, so my sense is that they wouldn't, because whenever you open legislation, it puts it at risk of unintended consequences. So like you have a bill to do something, but once that bill is open, that language is open to any change anyone wants to put in it. So I think there would be a reluctance to delve back into it unless there was a very, significant reason.
Yeah, but again, those of us in the room here were
Right,
not
that's just a
involved in making that
sense.
decision, we're
Right.
just making that circle, so we weren't at the table
That is a better conversation for somebody who is in the legislature.
or was involved in that process at that time.
Right, yes. Yeah, I don't know what went into the site selection because it was quite some time ago.
Sir, I have two questions about timing. This is a demonstration. What's its lifespan? That's my first question. Second question is, and I know the crystal ball is cloudy, but with the permitting process underway, with the public comment plans completed, with the final planning of how to produce and construct this done, and then what's the earliest that the construction might start?
At the island or just the overall construction?
I can't hear.
Are you asking at the island or when because you have to build the foundation?
Well, when would the work out on site out there begin?
Are you building it on the island and then taking it out?
No, you have to build the foundation at a port
Okay,
and then you tow it in
right.
because it's,
Right.
special infrastructure.
And my apologies, sir, is that I'm really not trying to dodge the answer, but I really, when you say the earliest, we are literally at that critical stage, of trying to define, because there are multiple views of how this is going to be constructed.
What's your
and
range?
the timing, the range between them is over a year, or it's almost 2 years, of difference between the two. So, and that's talking about the sequencing of the events and.
So is that
activities.
24 to 26 or 23 to
24, 25 to be complete, type of
Yeah.
situation. I could talk, that's very general, and I expect that you probably are looking for more detail.
I'm just.
But until we get
curious.
through this summer into the early fall.
And when
it's
you
going to
say
be-
complete, that means that the turbine would be up and running, or that means you would be just beginning to build it?
To be up and running.
Yes. 2024 to 2025.
Yeah, and please, I'm very cautious.
Oh, I understand.
I
We're
really,
not holding
we
you
are,
to
I want to give some type of result, but it's really,
But
we are in
not
that-
next
It's an
year.
unfair question, but it's a crucial question.
It is sure is.
That's something
I totally respect the question and the
Right.
need for it. But also said that we are literally in that stage, where the variables are many still that to determine that time.
I have one more perhaps difficult question. We are 3 people who have property on the island. And this was a big opportunity for people to come. Are you prepared to think about why they're not here and perhaps have a second time? It is a huge
I think that
responsibility for 3 of us to
people
try and.
don't know about it unless they look at the website.
So
Well,
here,
we send out an email and we post it on the rope shed and we try to
Oh, there
was.
communicate out as much as we
For
can.
seasonal residents, the only way I found out was to see, because I'm here this week, the notice on the road shed. That's it.
Are you,
Our 16 families all
Yes.
over the world.
are you signed up for our email list?
No,
Well,
But
you
we
should
are
sign up, but
residents and property owners on the island, so you
Right.
should have those
so
names.
here's what we have. So we meet weekly as a town with, bi-weekly with them to discuss the project. And we give regular reports at our assessors meetings, which are second Tuesday every month, which are open to the public, open to Zoom. We have regular email lists that you can sign up for that are on the Monhegan Plantation website. We also post the meetings on the Facebook page of the plantation and also the public, of Monhegan Public as well. And we ask people who are aware of all the iterations of family members and how extended the community goes to share this information beyond the island. So we're a small community, we're a small staff of part-time assessors, and we feel like we've done our due diligence as far as allowing people to know this information.
I'm sure you have, and I grant you that. I'm feeling that it is an outsized responsibility that I don't feel ready to take.
Well, no,
Say that
and
three of us or
so-
four of us have
So
been
what
able.
this meeting was meant to be was to work more on their schedule.
I-
So we had a meeting last summer,
Yep,
and COVID has thrown a wrench into our public meeting
Yeah.
situations. So, and that was a short, brief where we're at with the project. This is more as far as the project staff, as far as attending, because more has happened. Given, COVID has changed things, the, federal government administration, that changed, so that changed a lot of things for us as well. So this is by no means, this is one meeting where these folks are attending, but this is by no means the last Monhegan meeting based around this project. We were working more on their schedule when they could be out here, and this was what worked best for them to do that. But this is by no means, we're not relying on the three of you to do any of that.
I-
But it
Thank you.
does put a high premium on the responsibility to get the public comment period well attended and well involved.
Of course, and we
how
have a
to-
lot
and
of
how to
folks,
prepare people for that,
sure,
perhaps beyond the way in which we were prepared for this, is an important consideration.
Or perhaps you in your dealings with island folks over the last 10 years have a better sense of how much buy-in there is, and if there isn't, and if that's part of the reason why they're not here, are there other ways that you can think of to get more involvement?
I mean, this is the first meetings we've had in years, and they were better attended early on, and less now that things have kind of solidified and moved towards the actual project happening. Here's a place, here's a location, here is the technology. I wouldn't say interest has waned, but the abstractness of it has gone away, and people there are a lot of, I can't speak for everybody related to Monhegan, because there are hundreds, if not thousands of people connected, but there's a sentiment of like, either let's get it over with and get it done with, and let's move on and stop meeting about it.
Okay.
Or the technology, and not so interested in the technology because it doesn't matter what the technology is, because I don't want to see it. So we're trying to balance thousands, hundreds of opinions on what this is supposed to look like, and we're just trying to guide the information part of it and get people's opinions along the way.
Thank you.
is
I
what we-
appreciate that.
The best we can.
Yep.
I'd
Given-
sign up for the email. I'd go onto the Meta site and I'd get on there, make sure you're on the.
Yeah, and I would also, I posted the website addresses up there, but they're easy to find if you search on Hegan Island, Department of
Do we have
Energy.
Are
something?
these for us to take?
You can take that most like, yes.
They're in this?
Yep.
You should get one of those.
I guess we'll put them in.
Yeah.
I have one more
Sure.
question.
Mabel.
Sorry.
Sure. No, please.
Would it be possible, I mean, if the legislature won't do anything, to move the location right out to the 3-mile line? And therefore minimize sound, minimize horn sound,
So,
and visual impact.
yeah,
Is
push
that
it,
a possibility
push it away as far as possible.
as far as possible?
Yeah, so one good thing is that the synthetic option that I was talking about, that is a further away location. What's defining exactly where that needs to be is actually the subsurface conditions.
Okay.
So we did a big geotechnical study out there of this area. And those anchors, they need to sit in certain soil conditions and pockets.
Okay.
And they're these deep pockets.
Yeah.
And it's a rocky bottom out there.
Yeah.
So there's only certain places we can put them. So this was with that smaller footprint.
Yeah.
This is where this needed to be to hit those pockets.
Okay.
Same thing with the catenary. And we can't go beyond this line with our anchors.
All right.
So
That's a
even though it's
question.
shown here, the anchors are kind of coming out like this.
Yeah.
So they are very close to that line, but we can't take them away. So I would say this is pretty much it's kind of the furthest location we can be with hitting the geotechnical and not bringing the anchors over that line. But this is an improvement over the catenary, a little bit further out.
All right, so then you might do the blue.
Yeah,
That
this is
the plan.
this is what we want to do.
That's our preference.
That's our
That's your
preference.
preference.
We just have to make sure the engineering works for that. And that's what we're.
That hybrid cable that we were
Yeah.
talking about, that half rope, half chain, that's what we're trying to make work.
Yeah.
So that would make that happen.
Mhm.
And
Thank you
moving it
very,
over.
very much
Thank you for your
for
time. Thank you.
giving us the time and allowing us to ask the questions.
So, and as Jim noted, this is not the last engagement, now that COVID is passed, hopefully something to us,
So
we
it's
get
not
to be
gonna
more of the.
We voted.
Out of it.
You're okay, you're good. Thank you, sir.
My question about the demonstration, is there a time?
Yeah, no,
20
we
years.
can do it.
20? Who's gonna evaluate it? How's it gonna be evaluated?
We'll be the
Yeah,
operator.
yeah.
We're gonna develop construction option.
Yeah.
Is there anything within the legislation that has them looking
That's
over your shoulder? or
That's
looking
myself.
backwards, or-
Yeah.
No, but as it's running, as it's operational.
Some of those are modified, right?
So I know
Right.
a public.
Of course, the hall itself.
Yeah, university.
Well, and how come when you're coming